First and foremost, thanks for giving me time on extremely short notice. Full transparency for people. We are taping this on Friday. It is the same day that you have written something eloquent and beautiful for argonauts.ca, which I implore people to go read if they haven't already. If they haven't, by the time that this podcast comes out, I'll be shocked because I think it is making its way around social media right now, as it should, because it is powerful. But first and foremost, I want to ask you, Mike, as a close friend, of course, of Chris's, that you have been doing the gauntlet. You've become a voice for him in the last 24 hours here, and it's a difficult position to be in, clearly. And I'm wondering how you were able to put fingers to keyboard and write something the way that you did on such short notice.
I wanted to write while it was fresh. You can see it's still fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got the news about 7:30 on Friday night, and it hurt. And excuse me, I wanted to do something while I felt that bad, and I did. I'm glad you enjoyed the piece. It wasn't an easy one to write, but man, the news was shocking. Like when you get on the other side of 50, those calls about your peers are going to come more frequently. Instead of once every 10 years, then every 5 years, then it's going to come on a more regular basis. But I talked to Schultz. He died on Thursday night. I talked to him the Thursday night before, and he sounded great. And I think anybody in the football community or fans know he had a tough go of it for a while. His dad died. He had a couple of health scares. His presence was felt less on the TSN panel, and he's bounced back. He had a rough go of it after his dad died. And what makes this story even sadder is the fact that he was in a good place when we last spoke. He was affected by the death of Tony Darchie, who was a producer at TSN on the football broadcasts. And, that's something we had talked about the week before, but he seemed really good. And, a man with a big heart had a big heart attack, and it got him. So it was sad news.
It's as much as it is sad news, there's also some peace that comes in the knowledge that he did conquer a lot of the things that were challenging him throughout his career, for me at least. And I also, it's been amazing to hear a number of people, yourself and the football community at large, that I don't know if Chris knew how appreciated he was before he passed, but the amount of outpouring from every single corner of not just Canadian football, but broadcasting, and people who grew up in the Burlington Aldershot area, and people who stumbled across him at an Argos game, or somebody that saw him in the street. I mean, it's one of those things that you have to find comfort in the small things when you can. And for me, I would have to imagine that, as someone who knows him as well as you do, the comfort of knowing that that guy was incredibly well respected, and his name carries forward as a gold standard in a lot of different parts of what Canadian football fans value. That has to be something that you'll remember.
I think he was looked upon because of his passion for the sport. Those who are passionate about the sport felt that come through. And, he just happened to be 6'8" and 300 pounds and a genetic freak in terms of talent and explosiveness and technique. And he was the one thing that I think showed in his secondary career as a broadcaster that helped him as a player. He was ultra prepared. He did not take anything for granted. And, you hear the stories, and I've heard them for years about, how after practice, other guys have left, and he would go back and, hit up Kelvin Prunster or somebody and go back in the film room and start watching more film. Nothing he did was by accident. He's the most overly prepared broadcaster I've ever worked with. And hopefully, and I know it's not hopefully, I know a lot of that rubbed off. I became a better broadcaster because I saw his level of preparation and the professionalism with which he's treated the sport and every broadcast, whether it be a talk show, one of the old Football Sundays or Football Fridays, or in the last couple of years, a couple of seasons as my color voice on Argo football. He came in super prepared, all of it handwritten in Sharpie.
Yeah, it's amazing. Now, was he an all caps guy? Because as soon as I hear Sharpie and big pieces of paper, I think somebody who is scribbling in all caps, because that's the best way to do it. What did this look like, this legendary sheet that we're talking about?
Well, it wasn't one sheet. I wish it was. His depth chart, he would have 4 pieces of paper that he would tape up on the sideboard. And I don't know if they were all caps because I couldn't make anything heads or tails out of what he tried to write, because it was like him. It was unique, his handwriting style. But no, he was so prepared, and he loved football so much. And one of the great things after Jeff Johnson left for Halifax with his family, and it opened up the void on the Argo broadcast. Perfect timing, by the way. I think Schultzy really, really, really loved becoming a part of the Argo organization again, even at arm's length. He had spent 8 seasons with the Double Blue, and then kind of had to be, even though he had a warm spot in his heart, he was neutral. He would, when he was on TSN, if they needed to be criticized, he would do it. But the fact that he could go back in, still be critical, but feel like he was a part of that family again, which he was, I think that was a really good thing. And if that helped Chris in the last couple of years of his life, I'm thankful we were able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Surrounding him with that support and that structure. The one thing I wanted to mention that I kind of pulled from the article was the idea of you trying to coach him along, because you just mentioned when it comes to the preparation, that rubbed off on you. And I thought it was going to be the other way around, where you were going to say, I was the most prepared guy and Schultzy took after me because I was part of this. What was that relationship like between the two of you when you were working for that decade plus together, doing those football Fridays and Sundays, and then, of course, reuniting later on in the booth to call Argonauts games? I wonder, were you the less prepared of the two? Because, Mike, I know you, and you're crazy prepared. So I don't understand how he could be that much more prepared than you.
I'm crazy prepared. He took it to another level. And part of the reason I'm crazy prepared is a lot of that rubbed off. I was always prepared. He took it to another level, and I learned from that. And it was, in the beginning, he was really nervous and tight on microphone, because he thought, okay, I'm Chris Schultz. I have to be serious. I have to talk football. And once he was able to start laughing at me and laughing at himself, more importantly, he became a much better broadcaster, and it was instantaneous. As soon as he was able to relax and get through that, okay, I'm on radio now. There are at least 4 people listening to me right now. I better be doing this. I told him once, I read the numbers that we had for the football Friday, or I guess it was Sunday at the time, and like the numbers were pretty good for that show. And he panicked. Like, he was like, I'm talking to that many people. I can't do that. But he loosened up and lightened up, and you would see that he still on a football panel wanted to be the serious, the type A football guy. While others were juggling chainsaws, he would be the guy that wanted, okay, I want to bring this back to the game. I kind of likened it to, if you're an NFL fan as well and you watch the NFL on Fox panel, you got Terry Bradshaw being bigger than life and, saying some outrageous things. And then Howie Long would be studious. Okay, now it's my turn. I'm going to talk about the X's and O's right now. And Chris was my Howie Long, and which was a kind of ironic, because he talked about when he was with the Cowboys, I used to share the training facility with the Raiders. And he used to have to butt heads with Howie Long on a regular basis. And he said, Howie was really good.
That guy will wear you down over time, no doubt. I also, it's when you're talking about kind of the evolution of his career, and I'm wondering if there was a moment where you realized, oh, okay, he gets what this microphone and camera stuff is all about. Because at some point, even going back through and watching some of the CFL classics that are on ESPN Classic and on YouTube, and that people have been enjoying, I'm sure, throughout the weekend by the time you're listening to this, because I went back and was trying to find a clip of him, because personally, I loved Big Mustache Chris Schultz. That was my favorite. And so I wanted to be able to grab a clip of that. And I find this old clip of, it's the Battle of Alberta, and it's Matt Dunnigan alongside Chris Schultz. I think it was in 1999. And you ended up having James Duthie, who was the host, inside the TSN studio. And when you cut to him, he's still extremely rigid, right? Like he's turning to camera and he's talking, taking back to James, and then back to, and I'm wondering if there was a moment where you were either working with him or you saw him on TV where you just flipped through the channels and you went, you know what? He doesn't seem like he's robot anymore. He's just being himself.
I don't know if there was like that, epiphany, but it was just, I think, a gradual matter of time when he started to be able to laugh at himself.
Yeah.
That just relaxed him. And it made it so much. I wrote the story. I'll tell it here for those who didn't get a chance to read it. But I thought I needed to get him to loosen up, and it was the early days of the Football Sunday show, and we went to a commercial break, and I said to him, "Hey, Schultzy, I'm just going to go. I'm going to talk." Barry Davis was the board op at the time, who ended up with the Blue Jay broadcast. And I said, "I got to go talk to Barry. I'll be back in." He said, "Okay." And he's checking his notes and doing what Schultzy did and preparing for the next segment. And Barry said, "Okay, the commercial break's over. Get back in there." And I said, "No, watch this." And I went back and I did one of these with a big smile on my face on the other side of the studio glass. And Schultzy hears the intro music for the segment. And he kind of goes, and he looks at me and he gets this stern look, completely expressed, no smile, no smirk, just mean Chris Schultz face, Fu Manchu mustache. And he looked at me and he went, and he pointed at an empty chair. He went,
"Get in here.
Get in here." And I told him why I did it. And he said, "If you ever do that again," and he was able to laugh afterwards. But it was an empty segment, and I said, we actually talked about it on the air. I said, "I'm trying to have some fun with this, dude. Like you're still nervous," and I think it was stuff like that. Schultzy would always, the best shows were when Schultzy would end up and he said, "That was fast."
Yeah.
Because the show had flown by, and you can appreciate that as much as anybody. Where sometimes a show can feel like a grind, and other times it zooms right by. I can't remember ever finishing a show with Chris or even a segment with Chris and going, "That didn't work," because he was so prepared and so passionate. And I think that's a lot of broadcasters try to find chemistry with a partner. And I think the reason Chris and I worked was we developed a respect for each other. And I think a big part of it was, first of all, we respected the game. Secondly, neither one of us put ourselves above the broadcast or the game. And three, we just enjoyed each other's company. So it was like two guys who go, "Okay, the game is the star. We're going to try and add something to this, and we're just kind of these little guys down here just doing our job." And I think that's what made it work so well. And we took the subject matter seriously when it needed to be treated seriously, but we just had fun doing it.
I think that for you and I, play-by-play, we enjoy so much in the Canadian Football League or U Sports, whatever it might be. Canadian football as a game, just because of the tempo, it does go so quickly. Even with games that have a ton of commercials in them, it flies by because it's so much fun. And that leads me to the two of you reuniting in 2018. The moment that you realized you were going to get to work with him again, I'm sure would have been glorious, because you're going, "Man, the possibilities are endless here of the things that we could do together." But I'm wondering what the best part of calling a game with Chris Schultz was.
If I asked him to, one, I never knew what he was going to say.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a positive way. It wasn't because I mean that in the way that he looked at a game differently. I've never had a bad play-by-play partner with the Argo broadcast. I just haven't. But Pete Martin would look at the games differently. Sandy Nunziata would look at the games differently. Jeff Johnson would look at the game differently. Chris Schultz would look at the game differently. And Schultz was the king of the minutia, and being able to take that little nugget and being able to explain it to an audience and do it in 15 seconds, which sounds easy. It ain't. And he just was able to get that little thing that he saw and do it in everyman language in rapid amount of time. And that was a godsend. And if I asked him to do something, he'd do it. Last game we played in 2019 was in Hamilton.
Yep.
And it was backups, right? It was O'Connor and Prukop at quarterback, and they put in Shane Richards, who was just kind of getting his legs back after a pretty bad leg injury, and Maurice Simba, who's a draft pick in 2019. And they were both put on the interior. And I said, "Schultzy, watch these guys specifically for me, because I can't, because I'm following the ball." And he said, "Okay." And he was able to break it down like that. And I said, I asked him about these guys. And in about the span of 3 plays, he was able to see things that he really liked and things that he didn't really like that needed some work. And the things that he didn't like, he said constructively. He said, "Okay, he's a little stiff in this part of his body right now, but he can get there if he works through it." And just, he just saw the minutia like that. And that's something that I can't do. You're really good at it. I know my limitations, and I'd always let him do what he did so well and try to do what I do reasonably okay. And together it seemed to work.
His eye for talent, I agree. It was amazing in the piece that you wrote as well, Mike, that you were saying he could find one little thing and expand upon it, or he could dive in deep and give it to you in a big chunk where he'd constantly be testing you on X's and O's. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. I remember sitting down with him at the Grey Cup Radio Row in, I want to say 2015 out in Winnipeg. And he was the type of person, I love this about him. He was the type of person in an interview, even on air, where he would challenge you, but it never felt threatening. It was always inviting. He always wanted you to know the answer, but he just wanted to see whether or not you knew how to get there by yourself. And if you didn't, he was just going to help you get there. So he would come on, he'd say something like, 2015 Grey Cup where you've got Edmonton against Ottawa, and he'd say, Henry Burris, he has this real tendency to do this, but have you ever noticed when he slides to his right, what happens when they roll him to his right most of the time? And he put you on the spot on air, and you're going, oh my God, Chris Schultz is asking me a question and I don't have the answer. And you have to figure it out on the fly. And then you'd get it wrong because you didn't know as much as he did about the game. But it was never, you're wrong, I'm right, which so much of our media culture is based on now. It was, no, let me explain it to you. And then he would do it in a way that would make the entire show feel smarter. That's such an incredible skill set to not feel threatening, to welcome people in, and then to educate everybody without ever making anybody feel dumb. That's tough to do, man.
Well, he wanted to, when we started working together, he wanted to do those little tests to me off the air too. Like it'd be an hour before the show, hour and a half, whatever. And I'd be reading something, he'd be reading something, and he'd go, quarterback's first read, NFL. Safety? Strong or free? Just throw this stuff out. And a lot of times I passed the test, a lot of times I didn't, but it was a way to, I wanted to be a sponge around him. And same thing with Peter Martin when we were, when I was cutting my teeth as a CFL play-by-play guy, going on the road with him and sitting in the restaurants and bars and, after a game, and Pete was a guy like Chris that wanted to talk about the game after the game was over.
Right.
And which is always the best part of the game after a win, is kind of going back and talking about what you liked. And even after a loss, there was more to criticize, but to be able to go and break it down with a couple of guys like that who are so passionate about what they did for a living and about the sport, man, my level of knowledge of the sport just by sitting around and listening and learning, listening to their questions, having him talk about a player before the game, in both cases, and Sandy and JJ as well. I don't want to sell them short, or Lumsden, or it was Tilney, or any of the guys I worked with on television. It was really, really eye-opening to be able to see the game somewhat through the eyes of a guy who played in the NFL, played D1, played a CFL to that level. I was a kid in a candy store and took advantage of it whenever I could.
For the uninitiated, Mike, how would you explain Chris Schultz to somebody who maybe they're too young, or maybe they haven't been in CFL circles and they're seeing the name Chris Schultz trend across Canada on all social media platforms for a lot of good reasons today? And they're saying, I'm trying to understand what this is about. I'm sure they read your piece on argonauts.ca, they'll be able to get a piece of it, but how would you explain who he is to them?
Chris is a guy who became a unicorn in Canadian football. He went from Aldershot High School in Burlington, sent a videotape to different NCAA programs, went to a couple of summer clinics, and ended up getting a scholarship to Arizona. That did not happen in the late 70s. It didn't happen, or early, whatever, late 70s. And he goes from there. He was a defensive lineman. He was a defensive end. He one of his great stories was how he fanned on a sack attempt against John Elway when Elway was at Stanford and he was at Arizona. And he kept saying, okay, Elway loves coaching all week. Elway loves the reverse pivot. Make sure you keep inside shoulder. Do not let him spin outside you. Okay, coach. Okay, coach. Yep. Gets the opportunity. Elway drops back. Schultzy beats his man, goes in. took the wrong angle, Elway spins out, runs for 10 yards or whatever. And he loved telling that story. But in his senior year, after something like that happened and they realized, okay, maybe defensive end isn't what you want to do for a living. They moved him over to the other side of the ball. He took to it, gets drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, starts in his second or third year with the Cowboys at left tackle, and has a decent run in the NFL by NFL standards. A lot of guys get chewed up in that league pretty quickly. He was a part of the team that got shellacked by the '85 Bears. And the extended highlights of that are on YouTube. I think the score is 44 or 45-0 in that game. And he was up against Richard Dent, the Hall of Famer, all day, and did a really good job. There was one sack, but it was more of a coverage sack than anything else. I'd look and I'd go, man, Schultzy was all right, but they blew up that team after that season, and he was part of the shrapnel. But then he goes on and he stars in the CFL. He was a really angry football player. Chris Schultz, somebody would draw a line in the sand and say, okay, here's the rule. Don't cross the line in the sand. Schultzy would step over the line in the sand, draw another line in the sand, and then challenge people that he was going to step over that one. He was a super aggressive player. He was a very skilled player at 6'8" and 300 pounds. Like, he was fun to see in the huddle because he stood next to Pinball Clemens, who is not 6'8" and 300 and whatever pounds. And Schultzy played nasty. He got thrown out of games. He was, maybe for a next generation, think a bigger Rob Murphy. Think about that guy who just, would have been a nightmare to play against Adriano Belli. Those guys that play to the line and then cross it. And he did so while still respecting the game. As hard as that is to believe, he respected the game, but wanted to get everything out of it that he could, wanted to win more than anybody on the field. And he was just exceptionally good at what he did, and then was the gentle giant when you saw him away from the stadium. And he didn't mind going out with fans every once in a while and having a beer with them, and just being that everyman. That kid who grew up in Burlington still lived in the same townhouse where I met him in 1983 or 93. He still lived in the same place, and sadly passed away there on Thursday, yesterday, as we do this recording.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one that I got for you here, Mike, is that you're an incredible ambassador for telling the stories of Chris Schultz, which is so invaluable to people that want to understand more about him, and likely after hearing this wish that they would have had a chance to be able to connect with him sooner if they hadn't already. But what will you be most proud of your friendship, of the things that you two were able to create together? Because it's special and it's unique. And I'm not trying to send you off on a sour note. It's just I genuinely believe that as I work in a broadcast booth in Hamilton, myself and Coach John Sullivan, is amazing to be able to work with him. It's not Schultz and Hogan. Myself and Mike Morielli, it's great. I love Morielli. It's not Schultz. It's just different. You guys had something that's really special, and I'm wondering how you look back at that right now.
I think that I was lucky to know a guy. Oh, thanks, Marsh.
Sorry, man.
I was lucky to know a guy who I clicked with. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And again, it's as simplified as it needs to be, because I love in your story talking about him saying, well, I'm going to start a podcast or something with one of my friends. And you're like, yeah, it's simple guy, simple likes, wanted to be able to please people and cared about people. And it's so generous of you, Mike, to be able to share some of the stories on such short notice after the shock of everything coming down. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And I know that everyone listening to this is going to be greatly appreciative of it. So thank you so much.
Aside from the beginning of the end, you made it easy. Thanks, pal. I enjoyed telling the stories. He deserves it.